Support comes from the St. Louis Public Library Foundation. During these challenging times, free access to digital resources is a necessity. You can help our community stay connected. Support your St. Louis Public Library at slpl.org.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Roughly 3 weeks ago, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page caused a stir throughout the region when he broached the topic of bringing St. Louis and St. Louis County back together. And Page told me earlier this week that the community reaction to having St. Louis become a municipality within St. Louis County has been shockingly positive.
We've had about 10% of the folks say, no way, don't change anything. And about half have said, no big changes. We need to know more before we would agree to anything. And then another half have said something needs to be done. So we want to hear more. So it's all a glass half full or a glass half empty, depending on your perspective and experience with this question in the past.
The reason Page may be surprised here is that all sorts of different efforts to combine the city and the county faltered since the two jurisdictions split in the 1870s. But notably, St. Louis and St. Louis County voters have never decided on whether to bring the city into the county as a municipality. That arrangement would likely mean that St. Louis could still have control over many of its services, but potentially take advantage of county services paid for with a larger pool of taxpayers. Joining me now to discuss the increasing chatter of unifying St. Louis and St. Louis County is Joe Blanner. The Jefferson County attorney was Governor Mike Parson's appointee to what's known as the Board of Freeholders back in 2019. He's been so invested in the history of the city-county divide, he's writing a book on the topic that he hopes to get published one day. Joe, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me.
What was your reaction to Sam Page's surprise press conference a few weeks ago?
Well, I think it's a good conversation to have, and the conversation had been begun in 2019, and unfortunately, because of certain circumstances, we weren't able to finish that conversation.
Did you see it coming, given Sam Page's relative lack of interest in the city-county combination discussion in the past?
Well, I didn't see it coming from County Executive Page, but I have heard a lot of chatter in the community about this issue. And as a practical matter, there's been chatter for over 100 years now, so it's not surprising that we're continuing to talk about it. Speaking
of chatter, I used a very scientific method known as posting on my Facebook page, asking, what do you think of the idea of the city joining the county as municipality? And most of the reaction was pretty positive. For example, Andy Brown said, let's do it. We are better together. Hashtag STL proud with the fleur-de-lis on it. Nick Kimball, who's a state representative who represents part of Southwest City, said, something along those lines must be done. It is our only way forward. But then there are people like Ron Cook who say, show me the cost-benefit analysis, remove the emotion. It really seemed like the devil is in the details here, correct?
Well, absolutely. There have been a lot of efforts over the years to modify the relationship between St. Louis City and County, and ultimately all of those arrangements have failed. So the devil is certainly in the details. It depends on what that arrangement looks like and whether or not it's going to be supported by city and county voters.
On that subject, where do you think the idea of St. Louis becoming a municipality within St. Louis County falls on the spectrum of proposals aimed at bringing St. Louis and St. Louis County together that have been proposed over, 170 years,
150 years this year.
150 years, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say it's the most incremental approach that's ever been attempted.
Why?
Well, there have been a wide spectrum of attempted modifications, probably the most moderate of which was the creation of MSD, which was the only successful use of the Board of Freeholders. But there have been things like a district plan, which is a modified version of MSD, a bigger MSD on steroids, effectively. And then there have been things like complete consolidation of everything, including school districts. So there have been a wide spectrum of attempts, but there has never been anything as incremental as mere city reentry into the county.
What do you think would be some of the benefits of the city joining the county as a municipality?
Yeah, I think the single biggest benefit is the fact that right now you have these two jurisdictions, which, in terms of development and growth and things like that, there's competition. And so I think the biggest single factor is that St. Louis County then would have a direct interest in what goes on in the city. And it would create a direct constituency relationship between the citizens of the city. And so I think that that's something that would be largely beneficial, is that there would no longer be this competition between the two.
Do you think, besides getting rid of some of the city's county elected offices, which I mean, when I say that, recorder of deeds, license collector, collector of revenue, all which are elected positions in the city, and in the county, they're all appointed positions, and they're essentially under the umbrella of the county executive. Besides those, because those would clearly be the first thing to go, do you think the county could also take over things like the city health department or the city street department or the city's parks department, or even something as ambitious as like the city and the county police departments combining as well?
Well, I think if you re-enter into the county, I think it creates a different potential relationship. If you look at the way some of the municipalities in St. Louis County interact with county government, that is true. For instance, there are several municipalities that have the county perform the police function for them. And so I think it does create opportunities for those types of things to happen. Not that those things would be impossible right now, but certainly if the city of St. Louis was another city within the county, it creates greater opportunities for those types of collaborations.
I mean, one recent example that was just so glaringly obvious to me, and that the St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer talked about yesterday, is the idea that the city and the county have two emergency management systems. And the county's emergency management system is very well regarded and well funded and technologically pretty advanced. The city's is not. And we saw that in horrifying fashion during the tornado. So the mayor has basically said she supports the idea of having one emergency management system for the city and the county. But it seems like that sort of thing could be done without the city becoming a municipality. We've already talked about MSD, which combines sewer systems so that there's not two sewer systems. Is that something that would, like emergency management in particular, would that even require the city to rejoin the county?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, we have lots of examples of that in St. Louis, such as, for instance, the Major Case Squad investigates, significant crimes, and we have a regional 911 system, and so there's sharing agreements between fire districts where one can enter another if there's a major incident. So there's all kinds of opportunities for collaboration that don't require changing anything except our willingness to interact.
Do you think that this plan of having the city rejoin the county as a municipality, would that actually save city and county residents money?
I don't believe so, and the reason I say that is because there have been several studies that have been done on mergers. We talk a lot about mergers and about creating efficiencies and economies of scale, but the studies tend to show that tax rates tend to go up and that spending per capita tend to go up. I know there was a study done by UMSL a few years ago that looked at per capita spending on local government services in Indianapolis, Marion County, and compared that to St. Louis and St. Louis County. And the spending was actually higher there despite their merger of their county and city government. So, I don't think it would save money there, but there are certainly other benefits that could be derived from doing away with those county elected offices.
Then my follow-up, you kind of walked right into my follow-up. What are those benefits? Is it just that you would have a larger pool of money so you could hire more people and get better people to, say, record deeds or collect revenue or manage a park system or something like that?
Yeah, I think those things are all true. I think everything that you just said are part of the reasons. I think part of the other reason is that over the decades since the Great Divorce, those county elective offices have been a source of I'll say patronage politics and things like that, and so those things have been somewhat of a hindrance to city government. And keep in mind that the budgets for those organizations come out of city government. So it's just in my mind, it's an unnecessary extra layer of government in the city that could be done away with if they were just another municipality in St. Louis County, who frankly handles many of those functions very well.
So I mentioned that you were on a body that is known as the Board of Freeholders. I keep using the word known as Board of Freeholders because technically it's called the Board of Electors, but everybody keeps calling it the Board of Freeholders. So there's a very specific reason for that sentence construction, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Can you explain what it is and how it could propel an idea like this forward?
Well, first of all, we don't use freeholders because freeholders means property owner. And the effort to consolidate or the board that took place in the late 80s, the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court struck it down because of the use of that term and said we have to use the word electors, and electors are people that can own property or not. But yeah, that process would be the way that St. Louis City would reenter the county if that's the option that was chosen. The way that the Board of Electors, I'll call it, gets constituted is that there have to be a certain number of petitions signed in St. Louis City and County. And then once those petitions are signed, the county executive, with the advice and consent of the council, is supposed to select 9, the mayor 9, and then the governor is actually supposed to select 1 non-city county resident, which happened to be me in the last instance. And the reason for that is that person is a tiebreaker, basically.
Yes. Why did the 2019 version of the Board of Electors fail? And do you think that a future board that put any idea forward would face similar obstacles to what happened 7 years ago?
Yeah, well, the motivating force behind the effort in 2019 was actually the Better Together effort. So people who felt like change needed to happen, but Better Together went too far. Those people went out and got the signatures to form the board, and the county executive selected his 9, and the governor appointed his 1, and Mayor Cruson selected her appointees, but they never could get through committee and never actually got voted on by the Board of Aldermen.
And I do need to interject here because I want to peel back the curtain on this. Mayor Cruson never liked the Board of Freeholders process or Board of Electors process. She was a big fan of the Better Together plan, which would have created a metro government to oversee the city and the county. And she was really unenthusiastic about this. So I don't think she put a lot of effort to get these nominees through, but also the board didn't like some of the nominees. So Board of Aldermen, that is, but continue.
Yeah, sure. And then, frankly, the Constitution says they're supposed to make their selections within a certain amount of time, and that didn't happen. And then immediately on the heels of that, we entered into COVID. And I think, basically everything shut down and people forgot about it.
Right. And there could have been a lawsuit over the fact that the nominees had not been approved. But again, COVID kind of shut everything down. So it seems like the Better Together plan, which would have, as I mentioned, created a powerful metro government overseeing St. Louis and St. Louis County, faced opposition on 2 fronts. The first was from Black political leaders who felt that it could sap away their autonomy and power. Has that always been kind of a big source of opposition, the African-American community that feels that a combined city and county could ultimately hurt their political standing because you would have a large majority white election jurisdiction after that?
Yeah, I think there was that sense because the demographics have shifted in St. Louis City to the point where African Americans are able to elect more citywide representation, whether that's on the Board of Aldermen or the county elective offices or the mayor or the comptroller. And so if you merged the 2 entities, certainly that demographic would shift and there would be a loss, or a reduction, I should say, in the voice.
I asked County Executive Page if he heard any concerns from Black residents about bringing the city into the county as a municipality. This is what he had to say.
I don't think that the city moving into the county as a municipality really impacts that. The representation in St. Louis County is not part of this conversation as it's been structured, but it may be drawn into the conversation later on if people start talking about it more. There are, 1,000 or so elected officials in St. Louis County, and I'm not talking about changing any of that. What I am looking for is a conversation on how to deliver services more efficiently. And are there partnerships that we haven't yet realized that will allow us to do that?
That was St. Louis County Executive Sam Page talking with me earlier this week. Beyond reacting to the county executive's comments, is it possible that bringing the city into the county as a municipality and allowing the city to keep its mayor's office, its board of aldermen, yes, there will be losses in black political power because there wouldn't be elected county officials, but you could have a situation where, say, the St. Louis County Council expands, there's 3 or 4 more members, and there could be increased black representation in the legislative branch of county government.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about reentry, you're talking about something that's materially different than what Better Together was suggesting. And so the concerns that voice might be diluted is very different when city government would remain intact. And the only thing that would be lost is those county elective offices.
And plus, St. Louis County, despite being anywhere from like a 25 to 30% black voting jurisdiction, has elected a black county executive and a black prosecutor. And they, depending on what happens, they may elect a black county executive again. So there is experience. When I make that argument, I am not saying that a white majority jurisdiction will not elect a black countywide official. It just makes it harder in certain instances, depending on what the situation is.
Well, I think if you're talking about a Better Together merger, then potentially yes. But if you're talking about reentry, then no, I don't think it makes it more difficult.
The other traditional source of opposition comes from Republicans, particularly because adding the very Democratic-leaning city of St. Louis pretty much ends any chance of a GOP candidate getting elected county executive, prosecutor, or assessor in St. Louis County. Has that concern gone away, given that St. Louis County has shifted so far to the left over the past decade or so?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's where probably some polling would be in order, just to see what the general sense is. But I understand that would probably be an impediment because it would change the political makeup of the county.
We're talking with Joe Blanner, who is an attorney from Jefferson County and a subject matter expert on the great divorce between St. Louis and St. Louis County. So for his part, Republican County Executive hopeful Dennis Hancock, he's the de facto nominee because nobody else filed, by the way, is not a fan of when Page wanted to bring the city back into the county as a municipality, especially when St. Louis County has such acute budgetary problems.
I always liken it to when you get on an airplane and they give you the safety talk and they say, if the masks fall from the ceiling, put your own mask on before you try to help somebody else. We need to fix our own problems before we try to, hand them off to somebody else to solve for us.
That was Dennis Hancock, a St. Louis County councilman who is running as a Republican for St. Louis County Executive. I think that Councilman Hancock brings up another important point, that St. Louis County is going through budget Armageddon right now. And if this idea doesn't actually help with the budget problems that everybody's talking about, that could be kind of another strike against it. Is that sort of why there needs to be like a really deep financial analysis into this idea?
Yeah, I would suggest that that's correct. I mean, obviously the county is facing some budget woes, and the city has long had constrained finances, and so the old adage that if you tie 2 rocks together, they still won't float. I mean, that's true. So I think that certainly there need to be a fiscal analysis to determine what the impact on both entities would be of a reentry. But I don't think that that this would be done solely for the purpose of fixing the budgets of either. I think that it would be for the other benefits that would happen. But yeah, a fiscal analysis would be necessary.
Before we got on the air and we had a pre-interview about this, I talked with you about the word merger and how there's such a negative connotation to using the word merger to describe St. Louis and St. Louis County combining for some reason. Even though my family has lived in St. Louis for over a century, I'm not originally from here, and I am genuinely confused why a word merger, which means the same thing as combine or unify, are very similar, provokes such negative reactions among people. Can you explain to me why that is?
Yeah, I think largely it's because we have a lot of very strong municipalities in St. Louis County, and even though we have a large number, and maybe we shouldn't have as large of a number, I think many of the municipalities are very good at what they do at providing local government services. And I think that when you start talking about merger and getting rid of people's local government, they react harshly to that because many of them like their local government. And so I think that's where, we start looking at other incremental steps that might have some positive benefits, like city reentry, because, that may not threaten people's local government.
So you basically see the word merger as kind of a synonym for doing like a wholesale consolidation of city and county services, even though, and I'm getting really pedantic here, you are combining county services. So from a definitional standpoint, this is a merger, just not as large as what is usually associated with that word, which I understand is a very confusing explanation, but it seems to be where you're going with that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, the words obviously matter, and, the connotation that people derive from words is important. So even though in a technical sense, reentry of the city into the county does merge county offices, it doesn't merge the city with anything. And I think it's important to make that note, because people's minds, when they hear merger, immediately start thinking of Better Together or the past iterations.
In the last minute or so we have, you mentioned that there have been some plans that have been put to a statewide vote, and that's what Better Together wanted to do. But it doesn't seem like in the past that has actually helped, because we're still divided, and there have been statewide votes on this. Can you just briefly talk about the history of that?
Yeah, well, there have been 2 statewide votes. There was never a statewide vote in Better Together because that proposal was withdrawn. But both of the statewide votes, the one that happened for the federated city plan in 1930 and the borough plan in the early 1960s, were resoundingly beaten down. And effectively, the argument, at least in the 60s, was, we and I'm not one of them, but the residents of St. Louis City and County should be the people that get to fashion their form of government, not people who are in, for instance, Branson or Kansas City.
Joe Blanner is an attorney who served as Governor Mike Parson's appointee to the Board of Electors / Board of Freeholders. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum. Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.